Hello, everyone. Well, wasn't that a doozy of an episode? I'm going to recap and review Severance Season 2, Episode 9, The After Hours. Since there's so much to discuss, let's just get into it. The episode opens with Helena Egan doing laps in a massive indoor pool. Her body does not look that good on accident, so at least we're seeing what work she's putting in to look like that. We see time ticking, and it may be a reference to Helena potentially drowning if she's not saved in time, and maybe more so Helly drowning. Not to mention a callback to when Irving literally tried to drown Helena in order to get Helly back. It is wild that after nearly being drowned, Helena is so comfortable returning to water. I think this might be a hint about Helena's ability to get past trauma, maybe because of her belief in the temper-fixing therapies offered by Lumen. Helena makes her way to her father's office, who calls it a momentous day. This is likely in reference to the anticipated completion of the Cold Harbor file. James Egan doesn't eat, but we see Helena split a boiled egg into 6 parts, reminiscent of the zygote process after a human egg is fertilized. Again, I think the main theme of the show is birth and rebirth, so I believe there's an allegorical splitting here. Upon cutting the egg, James frowns deeply and groans. Helena says that they are seeing to Mr. Bailiff in reference to Irving. This is likely a reference to Irving's espionage activities, but it would also make sense that Helena is just personally eager to see Irving taken care of since he tried to drown her. Then James says, not James, no S, says, I wish you'd take them raw. Helena then stops eating. I believe he's talking about the eggs, but I do get a vague metaphor for sex here, and then of course we get confirmation that of course James Egan is a sex pest, but more importantly, it might just be that he's wanting to see her suffer to prove her strength. I don't know what it is. Either way, I think it's been verified throughout this episode that he's a confirmed weirdo. So this might unfortunately be a reference to sex. We do get reprieve from James' creepy gaze and see that the Egan estate is in close proximity to the Lumen corporate building, a reference to how despite claims of work-life balance, Lumen's and its executives have none. Alright, now let's go to Milchek and Miss Huang. Milchek gives Miss Huang a trophy of Jane Egan's head to commemorate the end of her Wintertide Fellowship. As we know, this is the same trophy gifted to Cobell. We finally learned that Miss Huang's first name is Eustace and that we are currently in the year of vision. Milchek says that Miss Huang's bed will be moved from her parents' home to Gunnell Egan Empathy Center in Svalbard. Miss Huang's new assignment will involve working to steward global reforms. Unfortunately, Svalbard is, I'm not pronouncing that right, but the Svalbard place, it's real. It's a cluster of Norwegian islands in the middle of the Arctic Ocean with a population of around 2,500 people. So it is extremely isolated and also just very far from anything at all. Miss Huang says she thought she'd be finishing the quarter, implying that Milchek fast-tracked her transfer from another assignment to get her off of his hands. This is really cruel since it doesn't even seem like Milchek is giving Miss Huang the opportunity to say goodbye to her parents before she leaves. She just leaves work and is immediately picked up by a bus. Milchek tells Miss Huang to put a game on the table, the game that she was playing with in episodes 1 and 2 of season 2, as a material sacrifice for her fellowship graduation. Miss Huang uses the trophy head to smash her game, while Milchek tells her to do it again. I didn't catch this on my own, but the internet noted that the Smash swimmer in the game is parallel to Helena swimming at the beginning of the episode. I really doubt they'll do anything to Helena, but I wonder if Helly might be in trouble. But again, it was Helena who was swimming, so anyway, this does seem like huge foreshadowing in terms of what's going to happen to Helena/Helly. My main question is whether Miss Huang is living in poverty like Cobell, or if her parents are well-resourced. Either way, her parents would have to be Lumen devotees to allow this to happen to their daughter, even if it's framed in some prestigious light, because I think the circumstances are so weird. So my daughter's going to go to work every day and she's going to, be in charge of adults that are kind of like children on this severed floor, and then you're just going to be able to have the unilateral decision to ship her off to a Norwegian island. I don't know. I feel like most parents would not be cool with this, but who knows? I mean, I used to be really into K-pop, and so you see what parents allow their kids to go through in that system. So I guess there are parents who are just like, yeah, sure. Mr. Drummond confronts Milchek about Mark's absence on what is supposed to be Lumen's finest day. Mr. Drummond blames Milchek's entirely for Mark's absence. Mr. Drummond then says that Milchek should apologize for using the word remonstration. This is very reminiscent of conversations people used to have with who they perceived as uppity black people in the South, who were admonished simply for being educated and willing to use their education in the presence of white people. I'm not going to say this moment is a microaggression. I would say it's very macro. But yeah, it definitely seems to me a little bit as if the show is commentating on how black people in particular are kind of told to make themselves smaller for no other reason than you have to. Because again, throughout this entire show, we see so many people, Lumen affiliated people, speak with very large word. A yearbook is annual reminiscences. It makes sense that Milchek would talk this way. Unfortunately, Milchek pushes back. He does say, I apologize, but then when Drummond says shorter, Milchek says, I'm sorry. Yet, there was a final straw when Mr. Drummond asked Milchek to say sorry again. Milchek refuses and says, devour fetulence, which Milchek clarifies means eat shit. Milchek affirms the scope of his role, in which he claims that he is not in charge of what Mark does outside of work, reminding Drummond that it's his job to be a creepy stalker, not his. Anyway, towards the end of the episode, we do see Miss Huang picked up by a short Lumen bus. And while I really love this for Milchek, I have to say, I will need him to apologize explicitly to Miss Huang. Although I have this other theory that maybe what Mr. Milchek is doing is he's also saving Miss Huang. We kind of get a huge hint that James Egan is a freak, a leak, a pest. He deserves to be under the jail, and maybe he uses the Wintertide Fellowship to sort of start grooming his future victims. So by sending her all the way to the Norwegian islands, he's going to be able to ensure that she's not being preyed upon. Who knows? But I'm hoping the best for both Miss Huang and Mr. Milchek. I do wonder if we'll see Miss Huang again. She hasn't been that important to the plot, but I do think that she served, at least up until this point, as a parallel to Miss Cobell. So I wonder if she'll have the same payoff as Miss Cobell. Was there some invention she was working on? Was there some way that she was able to sort of monitor everything that was happening and be able to be a whistleblower? Who knows? But I do like Miss Huang, so I hope we see her again. Let's get to Dylan and Gretchen, another very depressing plot line in this story. While making breakfast, Gretchen tells Dylan that she kissed his innie. She apologizes and he becomes frustrated. Dylan says it's many dimensions of fucked, and she says she did it only because innie Dylan reminded her of what Dylan used to be. After saying that Gretchen is using his body for cheating, Dylan threatens to quit and end his existence. And he immediately talks about how his job is paying for them and all of that. But yeah, I wouldn't say as much that this is emotional abuse, but it's definitely like, hey, let's not bring the support of my family in because of this. And while I definitely think Dylan has room to complain, most importantly about Gretchen lying, because if you don't remember, she did lie about meeting with Dylan. She said that the meeting was canceled. I feel like the average person would have a more like, question response to everything happening. They would, especially since the person's kissing their innie self. I don't know. I really can't say because I've never been in this situation, thank God, and none of us will be in this situation because hopefully we never see this technology in our lifetimes. But I don't know. Dylan doesn't like keeping a job, so I kind of felt like his commentary was really an excuse to quit a job where he doesn't even have any memories of having to work there. So I don't know what's happening, but yeah, that's kind of the gist I get from it. And also, again, that their family's on a very precarious situation because if he quits his job, it does seem like they'll be in financial ruin. I also want to point out that Gretchen is an EMT, so her job might be relevant in the future. What if she's one of the emergency responders to anything that happens to, say, Mark or even Helena? Despite the breakfast conversation, Innie, Dylan G, and Gretchen have another family session at Lumen. Gretchen tells Innie Dylan that Outie Dylan was mad, which makes Innie Dylan confused since he thinks that Outie Dylan should be happy since he's making Gretchen happy. Gretchen says she can't see Dylan anymore and she can't afford to have her husband quit. When Gretchen walks off, Dylan pleads with her, saying that his life started when he had meetings with her. Outside of the meetings, he only has pencil erasers. Any Dylan then proposes to Gretchen with a paper ring. Zach Cherry gives a phenomenal Gretchen yell here, which is both passionate and comedic. So this just speaks to the sort of complete scope of Jack Cherry's acting. I loved how, I felt it was true and passionate, but there was also like the way he yelled Gretchen was so funny to me. So this is a really sad story, but I don't think this will be the last that we see of Gretchen, and definitely not the last, in my opinion, that we'll see of Dylan. But let's see what happens to his innie self. But that only comes after we talk about Irv and Bert, sorry. I also remember, like, this is a little bit like Ernie and Bernie, Ert and Bert from the Sesame Street. I'm sure somebody has already made that connection, but anyway, I just made that now. Let's get into what this plot line was giving us. Irving comes to his apartment to find Bert in his chair reading his notes about Lumen. The notes say that they may be also connected to several recent disappearances or deaths. Goodman, referring to Bert, may have participated as a low-level Lumen enforcer or goon. So we get confirmation that Audie Bert has a more entrenched relationship with Lumen. Irving claims that he knows that he was wrong, and knowing Bert is no longer with them, he is essentially trying to get himself out of whatever Bert has planned for him. Bert then asks Irving to go on a ride, and it's clear that it's not a question. Irving must join. In the car ride, Bert says he's never hurt anyone. He says he simply drove people places and doesn't know what happened to those people once they got there. Irving asks if that's what's happening now. The next scene is of Bert and Irving at a train station where Bert buys a ticket for Irving. He tells Irving to take the line as far as he can go and to not tell Bert where he gets off. Irving can also never come back to Kier. Irving asks whether Lumen will come after Bert. Bert clarifies that he's severed because he liked the idea of being innocent again, but that his innocent part fell in love with Irving. Irving says he wants to remember falling in love with Bert. Irving crushingly says he's never been loved before and that he doesn't know how it feels. Bert says that's not possible for them to know how the love felt. Irving says he's ready for love, and they touch foreheads the same way they did in season 1, when it was any Irving saying that he was not ready. But Bert reinforces that they can't. Bert then, I kid you not, dabs up Irving. Okay, it wasn't a dab. It was a handshake, but it felt like real disrespectful. Like, don't dab up your partner like that. And I know he's married with Fields, blah, 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 whatever. But then he kills Irving with the bon voyage, buddy. Why would you say that? That was absolutely killing me. He's like, I'm going to make sure you know that we friends. We not like that. So Irving walks away with his dog Radar and makes sure that he gets to the train where he boards, and they go away. There is a shot where Irving smiles a bit as he's watching the sun set. I was trying to reconcile these events with what happened in season 2, episode 6, Attila, because it seems as though Fields had mentioned that Bert had brought people over to their house before and that there seemed to be some affair there as well. But my conclusion about everything is that actually what's happening is that when Bert would bring people over for dinner and Bert would say he knew them as innies, this was a part of Lumen saying, and then you drive them off to somewhere, and then that's what would happen. So I'm not sure. I'm gonna have to rewatch episode 6 in those scenes where we see that dinner between Fields, Bert, and Irving. But yeah, there was a little confusion, but regardless, this was emotionally hard hitting, and I definitely see a longing between Bert and Irving, and I do hope they get to reconcile soon. And I wonder how we're going to see Irving in the last episode of this season. So let's get inside Lumen. We got a shot of Dr. Maurer with the Lumen bandage on, observing Gemma in her cell. We know that the bandage is from when Gemma flung a chair at him. We see that Cold Harbor is 96% complete. Dr. Maurer tells Mr. Drummond that the numbers aren't moving, which prompts Mr. Drummond to call Milchek. Milchek believes Mark is just late. Mr. Drummond says the final quota was promised for that day. When Helly arrives at the office, she sees that it's empty. She confronts Milchek in his office about whether Mark would be coming in. Milchek claims he can't say because of non-disclosure. Helly makes clear she's concerned because of Mark's nosebleed. When Milchek rebuffs Helly's concern and says that Dylan is head of the department in Mark's absence, Helly snarkily comments that the same thing happened between him and Cobell. So she's kind of inferring that the role that was assumed by both Dylan and Mr. Milchek were not from merit, but out of necessity from the absence of the prior leader. Helly then asks whether she should be called Helly E in reference to Egan, but Milchick makes clear that Helena Egan is his employer and that Helly is simply his subordinate, so they do not have the same name. Helly is irreverent in her subordination and slams Milchick's door. Dylan tells Helly all about his time with Gretchen. Helly insists that he should save the ring for someone he meets on the severed floor, and reminds Dylan that he is a different person from his Audi. She points out how all Audis treat them poorly. Dylan then says there's nothing to do about it because they are stuck on the severed floor with no lives. Helly insists that they follow the clues provided by Irving about the export hall. And here's where things escalate. Dylan then says it's Helly's fault that they're down there in the first place, kind of inferring that because she's Helena Egan on the outside, that's the only reason why they have Severance. Dylan questions whether they're so different because they couldn't tell the difference when Helly was gone. Helly reminds Dylan that Irving did notice a difference. Dylan then comes in for the kill, saying that Mark couldn't tell the difference, and you can tell that this clearly hurts Helly and leaves her contemplative, but she resolves to complete Irving's mission by following his clues. She retrieves the map from behind the Hang In There poster and starts memorizing the steps. Meanwhile, Dylan resolves to quit Lumen. Dylan completes a resignation request in Milchick's office. Milchick says the resignation is disappointing and reeks of ingratitude. Dylan is made to return the key card as well. So here I was also a little confused because isn't approval from the Audi required before resignation can be approved? We know that Audi Dylan does seem keen on quitting because he thinks his innie is cheating with his wife. But we would see some sort of formal acceptance, right, before the request is actually provided. Either way, it seems like Lumen is like, well, we could skip some steps, and they just decide to accept Dylan's resignation. Dylan is told to report to the elevator and wait. But before he goes, Miss Swing apologizes and said she should have facilitated better. It's so heartbreaking because in what world is a child supposed to be the facilitator between conversations of adults? This felt like a metaphor for how sometimes children, especially in marriage conflicts, are put in the position to be the facilitators, even when they really don't have the faculty to do so. So it felt like she was kind of being that child who has parents who are divorcing or just fighting, and she has to kind of be the one to say, hey, y'all shouldn't do that because that might be something you regret in the future. And of course, while most conversations could definitely use that sort of facilitator, that should never at any point in time be a child. Fortunately, Dylan does give grace to Miss Huang and says it's not her fault. The next we see of Dylan is him going dramatically into the elevator, a sign that it might be a long time before he's down, at least on the severed floor. We then see Helly at her desk memorizing the directions of Irving's note. A figure comes into the hallway and we learn that it's James Egan, the creep. James Egan says, "You tricked me, my Helly." Helly appropriately responds, "What the fuck?" And of course, I think James is kind of referring to the time when Helly was at the gala. And so, they had that really important heart-to-heart moment that Helena never really heard because it was Helly that received it. But I'm very anxious because I don't know who James Egan is. He just seems like a down and dirty evil guy. So who knows what he could impose onto Helly, but his presence is not a limited one, and unfortunately I do think that spells trouble for Helly. So now, last but definitely not least, let's get to Mark, Devin, and Cobell. Mark and Devin are driving to a rendezvous with Miss Cobell. Mark's cough is nasty. He calls Devin's plan a mistake and doesn't think it's a good idea to trust Miss Cobell. It's important to establish, because it took a while for me to get it, that despite all the shenanigans in his basement with Ragabi, Mark is still not integrated. So I really was like, oh, he's integrated and now they're just meeting to come up with a plan, but it looks like it's still taking time for that integration to hit. Mark gets a call from Milchick, which he ignores on Devin's suggestion. Cobell arrives in Hampton's truck, stern and icy as ever. Mark responds to Cobell's question about his well-being with peak snarkiness. He confirms that he knows his wife is being held captive at Lumen and that he barely survived a basement surgery operation. Cobell says that they can only go to the birthing cabin at night, wherein it'll be less dangerous or perilous, as she says. She says she doesn't know if Mark finished Cold Harbor, and that if the file was completed, Gemma, well, she's dead. Mark responds with appropriate anger. Cobell says that Mark should call Mr. Milchick and say that he's unwell because Mark isn't locked out of the building. Mark refuses. I was a little confusion by this response because I was like, she's not asking you to strap a bomb to yourself and free Gemma. She's saying to call your boss about being absent. Something I thought that was already done. I was surprised that Mark actually hadn't done it already. But I think Mark angers more so about Cobell's overall deceptive tone. I just think that maybe the writing could have been a little bit clearer. That Mark is just upset about Cobell being there, as opposed to like, I can't believe you want me to tell my boss I'm not going to be at work. How ridiculous. Because that's how I read it the first time I watched this episode. Anyway, Mark gets a call, calls Milchek, and at first lies about getting tests for the nosebleeds. However, when Milchek suggests getting cards for Mark, Mark is honest and says he's not sick and that he just needed the day to himself. When Milchek asks why, Mark expands that Lumen is about balance and that work should just be that work. It's clear that this hits Milchek hard, considering this is likely the first time he's heard this in his life. Milchek asks for a promise that Mark will be at work in the next day, and Mark says he will. Mark then hides in the trunk of Cobell's car so that he can inconspicuously be brought to the berthing cabin. At the security gate, Cobell gets past the guard by saying Devin is one of James's. Devin has put cloth under her clothes to mimic a pregnant belly. Cobell then says, Miss Marsha White, 9th floor. The guard says, Specialties Department, and Cobell says, I'm looking for a gold thimble. I was so befuddled by this interaction, but after a brief look at Reddit, which again, I loathe Reddit, it's revealed that this is related to the Twilight Zone, which is aptly a Twilight Zone episode aptly named The After Hours. So this is kind of mirroring that episode of Twilight Zone. In the Twilight Zone, a wooden mannequin named Marsha White gets to live as a human. The exchange with the guard is clearly a code for some sort, but it may be reference to how a woman being impregnated by James is sort of animated for one time. So I'm kind of assuming that James is particularly targeting severed people, which again are basically children, right? So weirdo, deserve to be in jail, prison for life. But yeah, we'll have to wait and see. But ultimately, I think that this just coalesces to the creators clearly being huge David Lynch fans. But I think, again, there might be some code here as well. Maybe I think that Cobell could also be telling the security guard about some completely other protocol as well that might put Mark and Devin in danger. But we'll have to wait and see. Next we see is Annie Mark hesitantly greeting Devin at the cabin. Cobell is waiting on a higher level with a fireplace behind her. The scene just looks very sinister, and I don't trust it at all based off of what we're supposed to know about Cobell. Mark recalls that his last word with Devin was, she's alive, and the episode ends. So I'm with Mark here. I don't trust Cobell because Cobell knows so much more than any Mark, right? So I feel like this whole entire thing is like, let's wake up any Mark. Why? Everything that any Mark knows, Cobell knows 20 times, 30 times more of. So I understand this hesitancy of like, we don't even need to wake up any Mark. If you're really with us, you're just going to go ahead and make sure that we're allowed to get Gemma back. Maybe even allow us to like scream from the mountaintops that they have kidnapped my wife or what have you. But yeah, unless I see Cobell and any Mark have a conversation about just getting Gemma out, then I feel like this whole thing is bust, because I feel like Cobell doesn't really need to talk to any Mark about anything. Again, she knows so much more than he does, so I don't understand about this inquisitive sort of thing happening. But I do hope that they're just crafting a plan so that any Mark can help get Gemma out as opposed to anything else. Anyway, I really did like this episode. There will definitely be a lot of loose ends by the time the season ends, but yeah, I think that that's fine as long as the season does end with some answers. I think at least a quarter of the answers that we still have should be answered in this next episode. I also really hope that they don't introduce new mysteries, but I am sure they will. But we really have so much on our plate already. We just need to get a quarter of that munched off so that we can continue. And I do suspect that this whole resolution to Gemma being kidnapped, we're not going to get any answers to that in this season. That is going to come in seasons 3 and likely even 4. But regardless, I really enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you thought about the episode. Did you like it? Did you feel like you had more questions than answers? Were you also confused like me? Any thoughts that you have, please share them below. Thank you so much for watching and have a wonderful, wonderful day.